and out of focus. Here's your host, Sam Zervitz.
Hi, this is Sam Zervitz again. We're in and out of focus. Today we may be mostly out of focus. Thank you, Tally Olson. And the subject for today is time, is being young, is being older, is which is better. It's how do you move effortlessly or not effortlessly from one to the other. I want to begin with a few random remarks about time and perspective. What do we think about time? Do we actually think about time? We live by time. We live by our clocks. We're reminded constantly by time that we're aging. If you think about time as an entity, it's merciless. It's our master. It works 24/7. It's nonstop. It's not our friend. We invented it. We don't like it. It forces us here, there, and everywhere, not of our own will or our own decision-making. So why did we invent it? There's never enough of it. You can ask yourself, going back to the beginning, if you believe in an Adam and Eve and a creation, did they work with a calendar or a clock? And then you come to the end. Everybody knows about that. Everybody fears that. Some people wait for it a different way. But then we invented something else because we're not satisfied with what we have. And I don't know where this came from either. Did we invent heaven as if life is a tie or something instead of a loss, like overtime in a basketball game or a football game, or extra innings in baseball? We don't feel as bad just before our personal game of life ticks down, is over and gone, because we've got extra innings. Time is nasty because all of us at some point in time visit cemeteries to pay our respects to people we dearly loved and remembered well. And cemeteries are a reminder of our tenuous and unpredictable stay here. You look at a stone, it says Howard, born October the 4th, 1936, died October the 12th, 2010. He was a good guy, Howard. We miss Howard. We loved Howard. In our faith, in Yiddish, we call him a good neshama, which means a good guy. And technically, we ask ourselves, as we attend at funerals, as we attend these services in cemeteries, as we walk through those places, who wasn't a good guy, who was never a good guy after it's over? I had a nasty boss once. I never forgot him. He was the only funeral roast eulogy I ever heard. It was so bad nobody ever even willingly was going to lie about him. Now, I want to talk a little bit about big picture here in these random remarks before we get into the actual meat of the program. I'm Jewish. Jewish people will be 5,777 years old this upcoming Rosh Hashanah in the fall, approaching 6,000 years. That's old. Of course, carbon dating disputes this, dinosaur bones dispute this, cave dweller leftovers dispute this. My father's theory, when confronted by the irrefutable fact he was a creationist, he believed we were 5,770-some years old. And I would say, Dad, dinosaurs are older than 5,000. And cavemen were older than 5,000, and carbon dating gave us older than 5,000. And his theory on that, kind of interesting, I don't know where he came up with this. He said, we're the 5,777 level of creation. The Almighty kept trying this out, tried it out a number of times, and each time began again with a new calendar. Like setting an odometer back at the beginning of a used car. Okay, how do we celebrate 6,000 when we hit 6,000, when we get there in 23 years? So the world is 2039 will be 6,000. And you think about the flimsy little calendar. The world will be 6,000. The other calendar will be 2039. You think about that calendar. 6,000 is a milestone. Happy 6,000. And in a younger mode, we can boast we're the new 4,000. My theology on this is who keeps the years and where did the keeper of the years in the early days come from? And when we were one, who wrote down we were one? This is one. Adam and Eve, did they start with a 1? Then you had to be older than 1. Everybody didn't kick this off. Say 50 had to be something older than 1, which means something was going on back then before the official launching and counting date of 5,777. Other faiths have long histories. So where did they come up with the timekeepers? It's a war, our time to keep time away, not to be reminded of it. Every ache, creak, age line is a battle lost. Lose the battle and win the war by what means? How do you feel about cosmetic surgery? A gender thought. Years and years ago, I must have been in my teens, I read a memorable book called Temple of Gold. This was a rite of passage book by William Goldman, a great screenwriter. He wrote Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Marathon Man, Princess Bride, and other things. Anyway, so it's a rite of passage book you read when you're going through a rite of passage, which is the age we were all going through at that time. And there was a line in the book that I never forgot. I'm a tagline guy. And the line in the book was a little scene where one of the young girls was contemplating her future with this guy explaining her aging plight. And she says, only women truly age. Guys become craggy and distinguished. Never forgot that. I'm still waiting to become craggy and distinguished. I've spent a life, thanks to that line, waiting to become craggy and distinguished. I used to think about time all the time, especially time when nothing was happening, like coming or going somewhere. Do you ever feel like when you're sitting there looking out the window in a train or a bus or a plane, looking down at the world down there, nothing's happening unless you can figure out a way to make travel distance rewarding by reading something or talking to somebody. It's like time in travel is like pouring out perfectly good water in a drought. The best time I ever had on a plane was, and this is kind of strange, was a conversation with a deaf person, and I don't sign. So we exchanged several hours' worth of notes back and forth on vomit bags, the only paper around to write on. You learn a lot about deaf by writing your life story and getting hers back on a vomit bag on a Delta flight coming back from California yet. And now I want to include in this, since we're talking about time and youth and age and preferability of one over the other, I want to add to this a little bit of a poem that I wrote a while back about time. It's about time. And again, which would you prefer to be? Young looking forward to old and smart, old looking forward to young, old thinking back to when you had all that energy as young. Young and rakish in pursuit of time, I challenge the boastful energy of fledgling ignorance. The womb forever remains a distant land I left reluctantly. I think often about a wealthy girl on a blanket in a field my old high school settlers purchased from a farmer. Amateur affection practiced on that blanket gave those wasteful years credibility in my youth assorted definition. The flashpoint of it all is an embellished resume, a personal history, a feather on a bird's wing, God's perfect aviator flying off to join a starbound generation, evading my grasp. Before I comprehend its value in seasons, time and distance define my flaws. Cameras freeze my both learned and forgotten sins of omission. The best of youth is frozen in harsh sunlight. Now a book cover near a mosque in Jerusalem named Omar. How young was he when the walls of stone were first erected, never completed. Like many who remain childlike and childish, never finish a quest, in crusading awkwardly toward and conquering a newer stage of life after departing uncertainly from an earlier station. Omar's mosque, or Omar, so I'm told, suffered the humiliation of abandonment in the 12th century. I am now mindlessly carrying Israeli Jezreel Valley rocks off a field that took an hour at dawn by jeep to reach, while thunder bellows from nearby Mount Tabor. It will take 30 years to clear this field. Later, I pick olives from a 900-year-old tree still bearing biblical fruit. Here, everything is ancient as parchment, but I forget. A poor imitation. Who was it that put a coat over a muddy river so a girl could cross, protecting her feet and tender ankles? I'm doing the same, mastering civility. From California, she is voluptuous, has a boy's name and short red hair. Years earlier, in another regretfully recalled teenage experience, I'm trapped on a bed in a mansion outside is a snowstorm. A girl in pajamas tickles me with a pencil, and we are allegedly solving crossword puzzles. She will dismiss me the following week and years later die too soon because she inherited her fate from a mother who died too soon as well. She is raised by a father. I am uncertain how he manages in his time this bewildering task. This past summer, I lost a daughter of exquisite beauty and eternal youth, a young and golden creationist of the first order. She still radiant in repose. In death, she encouraged my painting of interpretive landscapes. She bought me oil paints a week before she departed unexpectedly. I'm a creationist too, but I do not disclaim the findings of Darwin or Dr. Oz. And that's about time. And now I want to get into some other issues about time. What about frozen? How many of you would like to be frozen and then come back later when there's a cure or when there's a way to figure out old age? Woody Allen did a movie about being frozen and waking up in the future. Given the choice, when would you have liked to live? My take, anywhere and any time with a supply of antibiotics. Except it's likely the pharmaceutical and insurance companies would chase you to hell if you got away with more pills than you should have had if your policy doesn't cover it. I'm a great fan of Bruce J. Friedman, who was considered around the 80s, maybe America's funniest writer. And he wrote an hysterical article in Esquire years ago about a party for guys soon to be frozen. They called the article Frozen Guys, and they were talking about being frozen. I don't know about where that went, but that was all the vogue then. And then I think about in terms of time. Every once in a while, when I'm back in Baltimore, my hometown, and I'm driving around northwest Baltimore, I drive by this elementary school. I was in its first class in 1946, and they made us all sign a piece of paper and put it in a cornerstone. The school was on Rogers Avenue, and we were the first kindergarten. I could write my name then, I did. Sometimes imagine breaking into that cornerstone and getting my name back. I never did like that school. I got in a fight, one of my few on the playground, where both of us took a swing and connected, and white things came flying out of his mouth, teeth, I guess, and we both screamed and ran away. And then I'm thinking about now. I'm not a Mel Gibson fan. Very few people are anymore. He's doing his redemption movies now. But he did a very sweet movie, maybe 10 years or more or so ago, called Forever Young. And it's a wonderful little movie, and I just wish it weren't Mel Gibson doing it. He's got his problems. And I hope he's working them out. I wish him well. But the movie was about a pilot, possibly years and years ago, and it's identified, I guess, in pre-World War II days. And he's got a girlfriend, and he's one of the early flyers, and he's proud of his flying skills, of course. And something happens there in a restaurant. She gets up to leave, walks across the street, and through the restaurant window he sees her plowed over by a car or a truck or something. And he loses everything. He can't function anymore. So he gets into some sort of an arrangement where he's put into a time machine, and he's shut down. And then some kids, years and years later, some kids are playing in a lost hangar with whatever's left over back there that's been largely forgotten about over the years. And one of the things left in there is the time machine. And they accidentally play with it, open it, and there's Mel Gibson lying there, fixed in time. And they run off. Of course, they're terrified because they don't know. They find a body, and all of a sudden it's moving. And Mel Gibson survives this. And then gradually he finds the kids again, and they become his friends. And one of them especially becomes his friend, and he teaches the kids some kind of fundamental flying lessons for fun, takes care of the kid's mother, who's single and has a miserable ex-husband that comes by every once in a while. And then at the end, he's aging. The Army's after him, of course. Somebody figures out he's got the secret of time for space travel because he can put himself to sleep and then wake up 3 years later or 10 years later. So the Army, of course, and the government's pursuing him, and they find an air show he gets in an old plane, an antique plane, and he's dying. He's aging in front of you. He's getting gray. He's getting wrinkled, and and the kid flies him because he just found out that the original love of his life isn't dead. She's living somewhere off the coast of somewhere, and he flies to it. And this is what I remember about this, because I always wanted to do this. In my life, I wanted to do this with a lost love if I had one. And I did have one, and I tried to do it. It didn't work. So the child lands the plane. He gets out. He's walking around. The old woman is coming back from the beach. It's a great scene, and it's one of the best scenes in movies you'll ever see, and one of the best last lines in a movie I've ever heard. He runs up to her as if it's the time when he knew her years and years ago. She looks at him, he looks at her, they hug, and he says, "Are you going to marry me or what?" And I always thought, if I could find somebody from 50 years ago, "Are you going to marry me or what?" would be a great line. You know, shaking all the years off and going back to that. Anyway, so then there's Dr. Oz. There's Dr. Oz's stuff, mostly for women. And commercials. I want to get into Dr. Oz is always making you younger. I don't know. I think Dr. Oz has built a career on that. Anyway, I want to get into some things about commercials, wrinkle cream, other stuff. And I'm a little vexed at this point. There's a long-running commercial. I don't know who she is. She's an actress about 40, and she's jogging down a path, and she claims to be 60, and she says she has a long life and lots of plans, and she's talking about her Medicare B program, and this is, of course, aimed at our demographic, Medicare B, and there's nothing out of pocket, and it's endorsed by ARP. And I'm a little questioning about ARP endorsing everything that has anything to do with my age range anymore. I don't like her. Because I don't believe she's 60. I think she's an actress. I don't believe she's anything. Anyway, it's about the demographic. And so I'm back to the Mel Gibson movie. I never got over that. I see that scene in my mind whenever I'm thinking about going back and where I was, and when I was 20 and when I was 21 and 22. And I'm thinking of that lost love when she was 17 and I was 20. And then I start to realize you can't go back. You can't recapture your youth by populating it with people you knew back then. And that's maybe a great truth, because there are an awful lot of people, thousands and thousands of people, trying to find their youth online with somebody they lost as a young person. And then there's another thing I want to talk about. I'm a media person. I read books. I watch movies. I do this. I do that. You have to read this. You absolutely have to read this. It's the best book on the subject of time I've ever read, and maybe one of the best books I've ever read altogether. It's called Replay by Ken Grimwald. I think he passed away since he wrote it about 20 years ago. It won all kinds of awards. A wonderful, wonderful book. I've actually ordered this book about a dozen times and circulated it to people I wanted to have it. It's the great truth about aging and time passing, and having time back. And it begs the question: if you could go back, what would you do differently? If you could have it back, what would you do differently? And the guy in the book, the first couple of pages of the book, the guy's at work. He's in his 40s. The wife calls, and he's on the phone with her. And she says, "Something happened today. We've got to work this out." And he's on the phone. He's on alert. And she says, "We need new shower curtains." And on that line, he dies. He dies at his desk. He starts to feel he's going out, and he dies. Just like that. And then in the next sequence, he wakes up, and he's 20-some, and he's in college again. And he's going back the 25 or so years to an earlier time, to the 60s maybe, 50s, 60s, and he's back in college with a girlfriend in a car. And he's thinking about and he says, "Wait a minute, am I dreaming this? No, I'm really back." And he's looking at all the signs and symbols that tell him, no, he's really back. He's got that 25 years back. What's he going to do with it? And what is he going to do with it? He makes an instant decision. He says at that point to himself, I don't need college. I know what's going to happen in the next 25 years. I know everything that's going to happen. He bets on baseball. He bets on the races. He buys stock, and he makes a fortune. And he marries wrong. It's a terrible marriage. And he's absolutely miserable, but he's got a lot of money. He hits 45 and he dies again. It's a replay. And he goes back again, and this time he says it's not about money. It's about a perfect marriage. So he finds a perfect woman for him, has an idyllic family, hits 45 and dies again. And he's replaying it over and over. And finally, the way the story goes, he meets another replayer. And of course, this is kind of Dean Koontz stuff. Of course, they have to wait for each other. Their time frames are skewered. She's coming back later than he is. She's coming back earlier than he is. He's waiting for her. A couple of years pass here and there. But they finally get together and even out their own replay sequences. And they decide they're going to do something positive with their gifts because they know what's going to happen because they've already lived it. So they call a press conference at this point, and they've got an envelope, and they tell the people of the press conference, this is a predictor of the future in this envelope. We'll call another press conference next year at the same time, and everything in this envelope will have happened. And as soon as this happens, the government grabs them, and their lives are pretty well over because the government wants to know what's happening so they can pre-plan it. And it's very Dean Koontz again. So anyway, here are some things about rules. What would you, and if you knew the future, if you went back to the past, Michael J. Fox did a wonderful job with this in Back to the Future and the three movies he made that covered that. This is something we think about. Is it possible? Is it possible to move back and forth in time? Will there be time machines? Can you make yourself younger? Can you be younger? Can you be back? Anyway, here's some things I thought about in terms of this. Linkages to bridge the present to the future. Link up. Actually, Sartre says there is no past. The past is nil. It doesn't exist anymore, so just forget it and move on. There's only the present. But you won't get to the future without the past. It's a key to staying young, at least on the other terms I'm thinking about. It's a track from beginning to end. Find something you love to do. Everybody says that. Don't move too far off the track. Stay with it, and you'll have a good life, and you'll be forever young. And that's one thought on the matter. Now, what about modern medicine keeping you young? Doctors, I grew up at a time when doctors were doctors. Healthcare has changed. It's no longer about brilliant men and women of medicine who make house calls. It's bureaucrats beholding to insurance companies, pretty much at war with natural cures people. So you go into a natural cure store, they'll make you young. You try to deal with a prescription, a pharmacist, an insurance company, and a doctor, that will age you. Anyway, my mother had this thing, and it's worth mentioning. She was a nurse, and she didn't trust the medical profession based on what she knew. And whenever she had a doctor, she'd insist on knowing, are you a big man? And the way she differentiated big man doctors from small man doctors was kind of interesting, too. Big men, to my mother, were doctors that didn't treat you. Big men were doctors who delegated to smaller men who actually did the actual contact with you. So the big man would come in, ask you some questions, go out, and send a small man in to give you what his findings were. That's the way my mother dealt with doctors. My mother was a gorgeous woman into her 90s. She was a little snooty to strangers. She lived into her 90s, and she had a hospital rule that she followed to the letter in the last years of her life. And the hospital rule was she'd walk in if something was wrong or she needed them, and she'd say, you got 24 hours to find out what it is, and if you can't, I'm leaving. And she did it every time. She'd just get up and walk out. You can't find what's wrong with me in 24 hours. My mother had a sense of humor about hospitals, And doctors used to come running to just because when she started emoting, she was hysterical. So my father's 95. She's in her 90s. She's in the hospital, and there are a bunch of doctors around her. And they ask her, what about her husband's cholesterol? What about my father's cholesterol? And she says, it's not his cholesterol I care about, it's his testosterone I care about. And one doctor falls on the floor laughing and says, get some more people in here, while my father says, see what I got to put up with? Anyway, then I'm thinking about my father-in-law, Maish, who wasn't as educated as my father. He's the late father-in-law from my first marriage. A lovely man, tough as nails, but a really good guy, very ungrammatical, very street smart. And his take on doctors, he always said, they got to do what they got to do. And he actually had, and he described it eloquently for him, he had a near-death experience where he actually said he had risen above himself on the hospital bed and was looking down at himself with everybody looking, with doctors and nurses looking at him, and he was approaching all the old relatives, the aunts, the uncles, the cousins, parents, everybody who had passed away before him, and they told him, and he saw the light, and they told him, no, Maish, we're not ready for you. Go back. And he came back and lasted a while longer. He was an interesting guy, but he trusted the medical profession. My mother didn't trust the medical profession. The more educated you are, the less likely you are to trust them, apparently. And then about commercials. We're flooded with commercials about aging, about youth, about Forever Young, and the one I absolutely despise that's running all day long, and if you watch TV, you'll see this 10 times a day. It's that car insurance commercial where you've got this obnoxious Peter Pan kid floating around the party, sort of on a vine, and he's flying around the ceiling the way Peter Pan does. And he flies into a crowd, and he tells the woman, oh, Betty, you don't look a day over 70, does she? And he's a terrible kid. And then he's flying around again. He kicks somebody in the head at a table. And I hate that commercial. That's the most obnoxious kid in the world. I wouldn't want to be young. Forever Young. And Peter Pan, of course, was Forever Young, which was his failing. And now I'm a little frightened. I have to admit, I'm a little frightened about this stuff because we have someone in our family who found a new book. And the book has suddenly become gospel. It's become gospel to my wife. And in this book, he claims, and I didn't know this, and I have a doctor's appointment next week. I'll find out. But there's a health-related need to establish a diet based on your blood type. I don't know what mine is, but I'm told tomatoes are bad. Now this relative says tomatoes are bad. Once it was apples, another time it was something else. Carbs are bad, cholesterol's bad, eggs. I'm an ice cream and bagels guy. Both are problematic. I can continue to indulge. Dairy is bad, meat is bad, salt is bad, sugar substitutes are bad, soda's bad, bread's bad, fat's bad, trans fat's a killer. That doesn't leave much in that refrigerator anymore. And then what about looking youthful? Creams will make you look youthful. The West Coast is a very youthful-looking place. Everybody's working on youth. Maybe it leads the country in cosmetic surgery. Youthful has everything to do, I think, with waking up every day and being thankful for it, being thankful for being born, being thankful for being where you are and not in some disastrous part of the planet, being loved, being in love, challenging life to the fullest, trying new things, savoring rites of passage for what they taught you, coming to the realization you're the result of deeds, misdeeds, values, beliefs, intellect, successes, failures, histories, interactions, confrontations, journeys, and defining moments that came before you. It's worth time to find out where you came from. But young is in the eyes. There should be a twinkle eye drops and a computer eye drops, because if you use the computer a lot, your eyes are going to feel it. And you could call the computer eye drops computer eyes, EYES. And keep track of what's the same and what's different in your world since you've been part of it. I do that. My house, when we bought my first house, we bought a house in the early 1970s. I think it cost about $30,000. You could feed a family of 4 for maybe $50. A car cost $2,000. You can't. There's a book called They Moved the Cheese, where some genius figured out if you can't adapt to change, change is going to destroy you, and you won't if you're not adaptable in a job, in life. Adapt to change. So that the $30,000 house cost $300,000. The food that used to cost $50 cost $500. The car that used to cost $2,000 cost $30,000. That part, giving into change, is the financial part. I think that's the hardest. My parents, and I guess my father was gone about 2007. My mother about 2003. They had dial phones. They weren't going to get push buttons, button phones. They didn't like it. They didn't understand microwaves. Computers were an anathema. TV clickers, no way. There was an old joke about living as where parents want their children to be bright, educated, doctors, lawyers. At least in our ethnicity, they do. And one of the comedians who was in that arena, I guess, of growth and growing up, mentioned he lived in a neighborhood full of carpenters, full of plumbers, full of electricians, full of home improvement types, and they were hammering and fixing and building, and he's supposed to be a student. So one day he picks up a hammer and starts putting a nail in a board. His mother knocks the hammer out of his hand and says, "Bad, fair, read a book." And that's what I learned. I can't fix anything, and I'll get to a point about being able to fix things, and I can't fix a thing. I can't put a hammer in a board. And I'm talking about what you need to learn to make your life different and more, different and whatever and more worth living. You should learn new things. It's very hard to learn new things. We get to a point where what we know is what we need. And years ago in our school district, and this was, I thought, one of the best things we ever did. In the summer, somebody dreamed up a program where a building was opened and a car repair shop was put in the building. And they signed up adults to take these car repair programs where you learned how to do minimal fixings and minimal oil changes and whatever else, and change the spark plug, do the things on your car maintenance. So who signed up for it? Judges, lawyers, doctors, mostly white-collar types from all fields. They didn't want to pay $600 for a car repair. And so they signed up to learn how to take care of their cars, and the place was packed with people in expensive suits fixing cars. And it was amazing because they got a population they never anticipated were going to do this. I can't change oil. I'm totally dependent on a mechanically and technically gifted son. My son, since he saw the first machine, can look at a machine and fix anything. He's a genius at machines. He can fix anything in our house. He's around. He fixes something. He goes into the bowels of the house, finds out what's wrong, and corrects it. Once, years ago, we had a Honda del Sol, a little sports car. And when he was a very young teenager and just starting out, and he'd take it apart and put it back together again like a puzzle on the lawn of our home. There would be 10,000 pieces of car out there, and then in a few minutes they'd all be reassembled. And it would pay, as my wife has suggested a million times, for me to follow this son around and watch what he's doing, because she reminds me he won't be around forever, and I won't know what to do, because I can't do what he does. He fixes anything. He can build a computer. He's built computers for people. Fixing what you couldn't fix before is a new skill. And the problem with this is it's generational. Kids know a lot these days, but you can't learn it unless you break through the barrier that there's a generational barrier here between us and kids. And it's a barrier of speech, dress, music, independence, a mindset that's not ours. And you've got to break down that barrier. If I follow my son around, and I haven't even made any attempt to break down that barrier, he's going to just lose me in the process. My father spent his time distancing himself from me by insisting his world was mine. Mine was not the right world. What can be learned from that is each generation carves out its own world. This is important in staying young. You stay young by joining, at least minimally, the brave new world this brave new world, not by insisting it join yours. This includes a modification in faith, parenting, careers, culture, politics, economics, values, tastes and fashion, life and lifestyles. Tradition is important, but young is taking risks. Young is avoiding fears. Young is expanding your area of interest with age rather than retracting because of it. Hitting a certain age, I limited the distance where I would go to a very small area. Then I met my new wife, and she expanded the distance because she's the opposite of this. Young is finding humor in that which seems less than laughable. Young is being able to laugh at yourself, and especially not to take offense when others find humor in you. There's this great story about our 97-year-old, my late mother-in-law from my first wife's mother. She was in this horrible, horrible senior home. I mean, a terrible place. And they're waiting them out pretty much. Where do you put people who she was losing her memory, and where do you put people like that? So we get a call from the home. And it's kind of a call like it's rather perplexing because she's seen kissing a man. And they say, don't worry, they're dealing with it by consoling us. And they're consoling us. And they're trying to tell us, don't worry about it, because neither one of them, neither she nor him, can find their way back to their own rooms. And this mother-in-law was kind of an antique, I guess you'd call her an antique babe magnet. And she was suspended from one senior center for spotting another woman sitting with her boyfriend Milton. So she attacked the woman with an umbrella. While she was losing it upstairs, apparently her lower floors remained fashionably stylish and comfortable. Now, the oldest and youngest person I ever knew, this is an amazing man. In our school system, we had a volunteer named Parker Douglas, and he was 105, and he was still going strong. His little suit, and he was everywhere, and he volunteered. He went to a middle school. They made films about him. They drew pictures. They took his stories down. This was about 1985, and Parker was 105 years old in 1985. He was the son of a slave. He worked his entire life, and he actually, years before, walked back to Virginia to see his grandfather, which placed him back 200 years in time. He came to Baltimore in about 1905. He witnessed the Baltimore fire, the Great Baltimore Fire. He spoke about how it began, where the owner of one of the stores downtown was on his way to Annapolis, the state capital, to disenfranchise African-American voters. And then Parker would say with a smile on his face he never got there. And Parker was this very proud, fierce 105, very sharp. And he was angry at his 80th son for not working anymore. He called the son a bum. He lived in this place on Falls Road for 80 or 90 years, and he used to talk about Falls Road in Baltimore near Cold Spring Lane when it was a mud pit. But the mud pit and the cars and the horses and the wagons got through. The cars in a jam didn't. He remembered when chip beef was pennies. He had a little market that he was still running. He didn't understand children being disrespected. When he was a child, if he went off, the teacher clobbered him, and then his parents clobbered him. And Parker was a great man. Parker survived everybody. And every time somebody did something or said something that apparently offended Parker, he would go on with his life, and he was still here, and they were not, which is, I guess, his ultimate retribution. Then my mother-in-law, Sonia, the one in the home, she had this, I guess older people get this memory. She had this really, really kind of crazy memory where she couldn't remember anything happening immediately, but she went back 60 years, 70 years, when she ran into the local numbers guy in the neighborhood. She didn't know what numbers were. They were the bettors, the gamblers. And one of them said to her, you want a phone in the house, Sonia? All she had to do was remember a few numbers he'd give her every day and then call the numbers in on the phone number he gave her. And then she was so proud she had a phone. She was the first one that had a phone in the neighborhood or something. And she told the family what the arrangement was. And they said, do you know you're a criminal? Sonia was a 12-year-old criminal. She was doing numbers. And then I wonder about the Bible a lot. And were those people really 900 years old? Do you believe that Noah was this age, and that this one was this age, and then all of a sudden, I guess God pulled the plug on that because they weren't as good as he wanted them to be. There's this wonderful bit where Mel Brooks, you may have seen it. I hope you saw it because it's absolutely gut-wrenching. It's one of the funniest things ever. Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner did their routine, their 900-year-old man routine, hysterical routine, where Mel Brooks shows up and Reiner says, "This is a 900-year-old man, and we're going to interview him." And you've got this crusty little Mel Brooks character. And at one point, I remember the line that jumped out at me was Reiner says, "Did you ever meet Jesus?" And Mel Brooks looks up and says, "Jesus, yeah, nice fella, quiet, came in the store, didn't say much." Everybody liked him, and very funny bit. And then talks about his wives, talks about what did you do when you were way back then? What did you do? Well, we didn't do much. We threw stones. We threw stones at trees. What else did you do? There wasn't anything else to do. That was a big deal. Throwing a pebble at a tree. Anyway, so I think about Odal and a Grecian urn, where where young people are frozen in time. That great poem, and that's something to think about too, among other things. And then I'm all right. Okay, I'll admit this. I have to admit this before I go on. This is a protest. I'm protesting how my demographic is portrayed. Bernie Sanders is around our age, and he's running for president. So and I'm about that age. And when people say, "Hey, Bernie's too old," and I say, "Well, I'm that age," and then I can say I'm the new 50. I'm busier in retirement than I ever was before, and I hate the commercials where I'm informed one of three, me, at my age, will fall down this year. So get one of those push button things where you bring where this huge guy is actually the persona in the ad, and he's sitting there over somebody who's fallen down, and he calls back, and in this deep voice, he says, and because it's an older woman that fell, "Golden girl is safe. Golden girl is safe." And then he says, "I'm always here." I hate that ad. I've never fallen and have no intention of falling. I was told once after my first wife passed away that I could spend my life in a local deli. If I don't do something with my life, I could spend my life in a local deli with other single guys discussing colonoscopies and doctor visits and prescriptions and health plans. But I have this wonderful new wife who's like a drill sergeant, really looks out for me, just what I need. She sneaks up behind me in the kitchen, and I get a standard crumb left on the counter warning, or else, as if crumbs bring plagues and diseases. I tried to cook something the other day in boiling oil and left it boiling a little too long and almost burned down the house. Now I need a passport to get back in the kitchen. Cooking? Don't even think about it. Am I busy? You bet. Instead of cooking, I'm planning an art show in the spring, writing a sequel to a novel finished last year, looking for teaching gigs, and doing this radio thing right now, outpouring right now. I listen to ads for insurance to pay for funeral benefits. I hear politics and economics of the day that has me statistically long gone by this age. There are ads for this medication, for that pain, or that for this, followed by ads to sue for whatever medication earlier ads bring on and debilitating side effects. All aimed at my demographic. I don't see any health care ads for anyone within 30 years of my age range. College kids get sick, but they get well easily. Then you've got these drugs. Hismotropa Gorka. Hismotropa Gorka? Take Hismotropa Gorka. Ask your doctor if you have spasmic votulosis of the lower discolotic theoprol. Ask your doctor if it's all right for you. I know if you're allergic to it, don't take it. It can kill you. If it doesn't kill you, it can cause migraines, blindness, deafness, joint pain, liver disease, kidney failure, cardiac arrest, or deep depression. Call your doctor if you experience any of these, but ask him if his Metropa Magna Gorka is right for you. Meanwhile, there's a woman I really never knew who attended an upstate New York college while I was there. She went on, as everyone predicted, to become a successful actress. In movies, she placed the heck out of why, well, when she gets these parts, it's almost nobody else plays these parts as well as she does. She's a wise, supportive, soft-spoken wife and mother, usually in family peacekeeping roles. She's doing this long-running series of ads on a medication to help out with something called menopausal osteoporosis. It's this chummy little conversational commercial in her semi-Shakespearean trained voice pitch. Chummy and serious. Both you and me will beat this thing together, where she introduces this as if it's on the minds of all mid-senior women. And here she is, their pal in pain with a solution. There are so many of these successful actors and actresses pitching products for seniors because they're seniors, and you remember them. Henry Winkler, the Fonz, pitching for reverse mortgages. Be careful about this one. We had a cousin hawking these. He was as legal as the day is shorter in winter. Anyway, Winkler and the woman from the school in upstate New York aside, I want to live the remainder of my life as unencumbered by demographic bad news about what could happen to me if these actors' promos are not taken seriously. Me, I don't feel any of this. I'm fine. It's kind of like, and then there's the computer dating services. Find me, find my walker. Don't leave home without it. I'm intellectually better prepared to deal with life slings and arrows than I ever was. I sneakily skip doctor visits when I don't feel like it because I don't want to hear from them in their demographic profile mode, calling me male and reporting my condition as if I've lost my name in their lexicon. Male. Every day I walk up and down a mountainous mile road to get to our mail from the mailbox at the bottom, go through all of this, and then I think about my father a lot. I think about all the things he went through at the end. Then I think about I will never be in one of those homes. Never, ever. You think about that and you may as well give it up. I'm thinking about crazy Aunt Dora, who was in one of those. We'd visit her at the senior place and mention something about her wearing two left shoes, and she'd grumble, no wonder my feet hurt. Or she'd say, you can go to Europe either by boat. My wonderful mother-in-law from my first marriage I mentioned before was the senior babe magnet. They say the real comes out and shows when you're a certain age. And then I think about music. And I heard some wonderful Pete Seeger and Leonard Cohen songs and Joan Collins songs last night, which covers the most impacting 10 years of my life, the six. They're the favorite song from Harry Chapin, She Is Always 17. She has no fear of failure. She's our promise of tomorrow. She's our past, our present, and our future. And I think about ball players and the names I can remember and the present day names I can't. I think about life with decisions I made. What if? We live in a what if world. My father had a lot of what ifs. And what if I'd gone into advertising instead of education? I only have one life and I don't want to live it as a bureaucrat. I remember my advertising class. I was really good at it. I think about people I didn't treat well that I'd like to treat better. I'd like to go back and do that. And then there's Bruce J. Friedman. I mentioned him earlier with his Frozen Guy stuff. There's this wonderful, he wrote two hysterical novels that I dearly love, Stern and A Mother's Kisses. Anyway, there's this one story he had this is the best. This is absolutely the best. It's a book of his short stories. And it's a wonderful story where a guy's in a supermarket and he's very New York. He's not Cruz or Trump New York. He's New York. Bruce J. Friedman has the New York vernacular down. Anyway, he's like Malamud, only much funnier. So in this narrative, the guy goes to the supermarket and decides to buy an off-brand can of beans. He checks the label and it says, if you want a wish granted, rub the can. Signed, the guys. He rubs the can. Out comes a kind of offbeat character, sort of a hippie genie. The can-rubbing guy immediately challenges him by accusing him of being a genie fraud dressed the way he is. The genie argues back, defending his fashion statement, and says, so do you want a wish or not? The guy agrees and immediately comes up with a situation where he wants another try at a girlfriend he failed miserably with years before. forever regretting it, the situation, the wish is agreed upon, but it fails again because the genie explains the woman wished him away after he wished to get back to her. You can't go back. It's a sign of it. Can you go back? Is it a sign of weakness, some unfinished life's business? The late great Yogi Berra said when he just passed away, and everybody loved Yogi Berra, one of the great players and one of the great gentlemen and one of the great people in baseball. And they asked him before he passed away in an interview, what would you do if you could do it again? And Yogi said, I'd do it again. So even the scriptures, loosely translated, live of the world, not in it. News of the world define. And here's a last little bit of advice before I close out. News of the world definitely ages you. There are those people from the steppes of it's sort of north of Russia, in an inaccessible land. And you got anthropologists who are writing about these guys. And they live into their hundreds. They eat berries and nuts. They run up and down mountains, and they don't know what's going on in the world. So watch the news judiciously. Process it as if you're on an information diet. And maybe with less stress, you'll live longer. And there's the story about the guy whose blood pressure went up when his stocks fell, and it went down when his stocks rose. Anyway, so I'll end this on this note. We've covered a lot, and I'll end this on this note with an Ambrose Bierce quote. The period of human life, Ambrose Bierce was, by the way, considered the bitterest man in the history of American letters. And in about 100 years or more ago, he ran away to Mexico and was never heard from again. He wrote something called the Devil's Dictionary, which is where this came from. The period of human life, intermediate between the idiocy of infancy and the folly of youth, 2 removes from the sin of manhood and 3 from the remorse of age. And on that note, with one more thought in mind that I think very, very well covers everything. To be old and wise, you must first be young and stupid. And next week, stay with me next week, because I'm going to talk about education, who's learning, who isn't, and why, and what the best of education is, publicly and otherwise, and what the worst of education is, publicly and otherwise. This is Sam Zervitz, and thank you for being with me.
This has been a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.